We lost a key scholar, a key friend, and a key contributor to the literature in innovation and development. He contributed to advance many of the core concepts of this literature. His work on capabilities on institutions, many were mentored by him, and many of those who will speak today as well have worked with him quite closely. So we have an amazing lineup in terms of the participants in this panel. We have here with us Professor Bengt-Ake Lundvall from the University of Aalborg. We have Prof. Rasigan Maharajh from Tshwane University of Technology here in South Africa.
Should I start by thanking you once again for your introductory conversation in Italian, which we enjoyed quite a lot in Pretoria. No, I contacted Chris and he said, I don't write long papers, but I have this one from 2007. And it's not a long paper, but it's very readable and very clear. And I regard it as a kind of potential inspiration for Globelics research in the future. He said the following main points. The economy should be regarded as a learning system. Evolutionary economics and the national innovation system perspective provide a broad, coherent, and useful theory of economic growth. It regards economic growth as a result of the co-evolution of technologies, firms, and industry structures, and supporting and governing institutions. Institutions was at the very core of Dick Nelson's interest. He didn't believe in techno-economic issues without bringing institutions into the picture. Furthermore, successful development involves the evolution of institutions is the least developed part of an emerging evolutionary economics. Modes of organization and management in successful companies in advanced countries are generally more difficult to imitate and learn from or to transfer than the technologies that they are using. And final point, for countries aiming to catch up, developing the capabilities for learning and innovation in firms is at the heart of the challenge. However, a strong system of university and public labs research can play a very important supporting role. Let me just finish by saying that I'm extremely grateful to have known Dick Nelson, both as a friend and a colleague. He was an outstanding scholar who combined brilliant scholarship with wisdom and humanity. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, esteemed scholars, and fellow knowledge workers. Warm welcome back to South Africa, and notwithstanding the thunderstorms that you see. This is more traditionally part of our weather system itself, although it's offset by nearly a month now. Hope this gives you a sense of also what I'm about to say. My sincere gratitude to the Trilateral Chair and the University of Johannesburg for convening this 21st International Conference of the Global Network for the Economics of Learning, Innovation, and Competence Building Systems. I'm honored and I'm humbled by this opportunity to honor the memory of our beloved Professor Richard R. Nelson. My own academic journey did not begin in innovation studies, but in the critique of political economy, grounded in a Marxist-Leninist praxis. I was also privileged to contribute in some small way to the transformation of South Africa's science and technology resources into the post-apartheid national system of innovation that has welcomed us all here today. Just over a quarter of a century ago, the CSR invested in building my capacity by sponsoring my MSc in Technical Change and Industrial Strategy at the University of Manchester's Press and the Center for Research into Innovation and Competitive Environments, CRIC. My choice was guided in Going to Manchester by Engels' 1845 work, Conditions of the Working Class in England, by Prest's eminent scholarship on STI policy, and by the late, and also offset by a month, great neo-Schumpeterian scholar Stan Metcalfe, who would become my doctoral supervisor. Unfortunately, a profound setback at the end of 2001 saw the South African rand collapse against the pound sterling. It went up to almost 21 rand 50. For those that could appreciate what 2001 was, it meant I could no longer afford to remain in the UK. During the time, Stan Metcalfe had recommended that I read The Moon and the Ghetto from the early 70s, which was authored by Dick Nelson. The text became my compass as I grappled with the painful paradox of trying to understand how the apartheid regime, which was governing over a crime against humanity, had nonetheless cultivated formidable scientific and technological competences. The apartheid regime had done so to sustain the profit-accumulating trajectory of racial capitalism, a system born in the late 19th century as settler colonialism transformed into the political economy of Southern Africa through the advent of commercial agriculture and mining industries. The Moon and the Ghetto therefore resonated deeply, and it opened my mind to the canonical work of Nelson and Winter, The Evolutionary Theory of Economic Change. This text would feature prominently in our domestic STI policy debates and praxis research. My subsequent encounters with Professor Nelson, whether in New York or more regularly at Globelics conferences, were always formative and a massive learning opportunity. I also vividly recall traveling with him on the New York City subway, an image that stays with me. For those of you that may know, I used to get onto a skateboard, but many decades ago. Yeah. And it always struck me how this steadfast man balanced himself while I struggled in this lurching carriageway, as it did the bumps in New York itself. That physical robustness mirrored the agility and strength of his intellectual praxis. Despite our clear ideological differences, I benefited immensely from his critical engagement and wise counsel. Professor Nelson, alongside colleagues in this Globelics community, spearheaded a core research initiative for Globelics on catching up. Our global collaboration compelled some of us to ask, catch up to what? We now understand more clearly than ever that converging GDP per capita with the quality of life in high-income countries is a perilous goal. As the Ecological Footprint Network warns, we would need 5.1 Earths, in other words, planets, if everyone lived like the average American. Prof. Nelson's prescient work on intellectual property rights and regimes remains critically urgent. We witnessed its necessity in the failure of the World Trade Organization to heed the pleadings of India and South Africa for free access to our global knowledge commons during a pandemic, when the COVID-19 virus threatened us not as citizens of nations, but as a single species being. World systems of our contemporary conjuncture reflect the international balance of force, and therefore the WTO as an institution chose to protect profit extraction over human survival. In this era of rapid digitization and automation and the transcended research frontiers, I sorely miss the ability to seek Prof. Nelson's perspective and receive his insights as fast as he would respond to emails. This is actually scary. I'm sure you'd realize there's quite a few decades between us, but I'm shocked at his productivity and capacity to respond as quickly as he did. So notwithstanding the passing of Prof. Nelson, let us be reminded that society is not dead. This is fundamentally important as we confront the rise of tendencies that seek to destroy public goods and services, that surrender us to the oligopolistic markets and normalize genocide under the resurgent specter of fascism. Professor Nelson's legacy is a formidable one. He expanded our global cadre of knowledge workers and armed us with theoretical tools of immense power. He gave us the means not only to better understand the world, but to change it, to advance the policy sovereignties that underpin our emerging multipolar and polycentric world. I thank Prof. Nelson for his collegial camaraderie and you all for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
On to the online participants.
First of all, thanks so much for allowing us to be online, and it's a pity we're not there. And it's amazing to be able to celebrate together. It's actually quite emotional. Our good friend Dick, we all knew him in different ways, but we also met him together in different places, whether at the Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, Giovanni, where you often brought us together, and Bocconi and different parts of the world. He was a good friend. He was incredibly generous. So many scholars are not generous. They just care about their H factor. And he was one of the most cutting edge theorists, not only in evolutionary economics. This is something that's important to remember. He was also one of the best mainstream economists before he went to the heterodox. And that process, that cathartic process of knowing very well your enemy, needing to move on to a different theory of growth and theory of innovation, is what too many heterodox economists don't go through. It's too easy to jump the hoop and call yourself heterodox without necessarily really understanding that very problematic field that we call neoclassical economics. He was a real master of evolutionary theory. He was deeply grounded in the practice that connected it, because he believed that good theory has to learn from real world experience, evidence, which is different in different parts of the world. That's why Globelics is so important. He was a real believer in the texture of sectoral studies, and he called this process of learning from the ground appreciative theorizing. And many of us use that word, and it really became a hallmark of his intellectual contribution. Believe it or not, I even mentioned him when I met Pope Francis, and I'm not saying this to name drop, but one of the things that Pope Francis often talked about was this idea of the principle of subsidiarity, that our knowledge and our work has to be at the most local level. And I talked to him about how one of the biggest theorists in innovation and evolutionary economics thought about that. And we talked about that concept of appreciative theorizing. Anyway, the direction of the field of innovation studies, which brings all of us together, has been absolutely shaped by his work, which very much tackled the problems in neoclassical economics at its core, not talking about market failures, not talking about system failures, but in a much more Polanyian kind of way, understanding the market itself as an endogenous result of how we structure these different systems, which evolve over time. And the idea of actually applying innovation systems and understanding the market and the economy as a system to contemporary challenges like health inequality, which he very much cared about, the climate crisis, the water crisis. They've all been really informed by his work. And of course, his work was so important about how the economic system actually evolves. And he shed light. I can still see him moving his hands on the co-evolution of these two forces, how differences between firms or other actors arise, but then how the selection mechanisms, and I do this because he always did that, winnow in and respond to those differences, allowing some to grow and some not. And he always reminded us, of course, that selection processes are not about the survival of the fittest, because what counts as fitness depends on the context, on the institutions, on the phase of development, on the varieties of capitalism present in a country. And all these insights have incredibly influenced all of us. His contributions went, again, super deep, because he didn't stop at just saying the obvious, that the state matters, right? So his own contributions on state organizations really contributed to my own desire to rethink the state. In other words, to actually look at the capacities, the capabilities, the internal structures within our public organizations, which in an era where we've seen so much privatization, outsourcing, the rise of consultants within the state, this attention to the granular form of state actors and organizations matters more than ever. And his commitment to modeling, combined with his appreciation for careful, grounded case studies, resonates so much with the work we do at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. So maybe I'll just end with that, just to say that my own kind of activity in setting up a whole research institute, which is now a full-blown department with its own training program, I think almost wouldn't have happened without the effect that Dick Nelson had on my own work and so many scholars. He was so generous every time. Like as soon as I actually set up the institute, he came. It was the first month it had just been set up, and we wanted to reflect together alongside others how the sustainable development goals themselves could be much more grounded, being put at the center of innovation policy. And we talked about the need for mission-oriented policies to do that. And he really launched the work that we ultimately now are doing, which is to take much more seriously those challenges, turning them into goals that can bring different sectors together. And just to say, I think he's a model for all of us. He listened. He had so much time for anyone at any part of the hierarchy. And it's a very different way to be a scholar, to listen, to give feedback, but also to constantly energize and to transform his own work. He was always, I think he sent us a new working paper that was a revision of his one on markets, literally just months before passing away. And the fact that he even found the time to do that and was always asking for comments is just incredible. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariana, for those memories and for also sort of giving us an explanation of how Richard Nelson influenced your work and setting up of your unit, and how his work sort of lives on in the work of others in many ways, including yours. We'll hand over now to Professor Franco Malerba.
Thank you, Erika, for inviting me to this great events, and sorry not to be there with you, but it was really impossible, but I am there with my heart. As you know, I have had a long relationship with Dick. I went to Yale as a student, very critical for mainstream economics. I was a student searching for something meaningful, and I met Dick, and he introduced me to evolutionary theory. He was advisor of my PhD thesis. Then he became a co-author, friend. So I have a long story with him. And just to take up what Mariana just said, he, as a person, as a mentor, he was a very unique person that should be an example for us and an example also for the young people. He was ready to listen, very approachable. I remember at Yale, he had always an open door for everybody who wanted to come in and talk, students as well as young faculty, extremely generous with his time, giving a lot of feedbacks, was highly interactive with students and faculty, very open to ideas. He was a very broad scholar and used the different tools from history to theory to cases, but also rigorous. I remember he always said, I want to get things right. So, I mean, very kind, very social. So a very unique example also as a human being and as a mentor. I was just in the few minutes I have, just to mention 3 points, very short points, about his scientific legacy. First of all, as mentioned by Bengt-Ake, Rasigan, and Mariana, he broke away from mainstream economics and developed evolutionary economics. I don't want to enter this point that is common and well known by everybody, but my point is, in the 80s and 90s, he provided and proposed an original and unifying framework. Unifying means putting together the theory of the firm, the learning processes, the dynamics of the economy, evolutionary processes, variety, selection, retention. Anyway, so this unifying framework was extremely important for everybody. Putting a lot of emphasis on institutions, as Bengt-Ake mentioned, from the Moon and the Ghetto, 1977, a beautiful book that everybody still reads on society and tensions and so on. And he also put a lot of emphasis on economic development and catch up, as Rasigan mentioned, as a process of learning, capability accumulation, institution buildings, and government policy support. So in a sense, he was a very broad scholar that gave a lot of contribution also to Globelics. Second point, and this is very important for the young scholars. He provided in his book 1982 and later a strong evolutionary methodology. What I mean with that? First of all, he said dynamic first, he and Sid Winter, and put a lot of emphasis on empirical analysis and on micro foundations, and where heterogeneity was at the base of the analysis. And basically he had a sequence going from empirical analysis, stylized facts, appreciative theory, and formal theory in that sequence, where empirical analysis comes first, appreciative theory explains what you have found empirically, and then formal theory eventually does something. In a sense, formal theory in Dick's work is a helpful servant for empirical and appreciative approaches. I think it's a very important lesson also for the young students that needs to start from case studies, empirical analysis, quantitative analysis, and then eventually move to theory to check for the consistency and completeness of appreciative theory. And so this is the second point. I conclude by saying that the later Dick Nelson had two pieces, probably the last two published pieces, and they were published in Industrial and Corporate Change. One is 2020 and the other in 2022. And that in a sense delineates the future challenges for evolutionary economists or Globelics and so on. One is a perspective on the evolution of evolutionary economics, and he said, well, demand has not been studied enough, services, non-profit sectors and government agencies, political processes needs to be coupled with market processes. But then he also says new links should be established with behavioral economics, institutional economics, and economic history. So broad interdisciplinarity. And he mentioned also, I agree, that a dynamic political economy should be developed. I think it's a very important message. And the last piece in the ICC 2022, the economic system question revised, well, it says modern economists are not just market economists, but they are mixed systems, non-market mechanisms, non-market institutions, communities, public services, education, and so on. So in a sense, this broad mixed system has to be examined when you look at modern economies and not just do a narrow and narrow-minded type of analysis. I think these are broad lessons, and these two papers also bring new and future challenges for all of us of Globelics. Thank you.
Thank you, Franco. That was an excellent summary of some of the key contributions from Dick Nelson. We'll move on to Professor Giovanni Dosi.
First of all, let me apologize, like Franco, for not being able to be there. Two commitments, one at the beginning, just before, one just after the end, prevented me from coming there, and I'm sorry. I think that I'm there with my heart, as Franco said. This is not a round table to mourn. I think the best way to remember Dick is implementing, refining, expanding the research paradigm to which he fundamentally contributed. In 4 minutes, it's impossible to even summarize the major building blocks. Let me just mention 3. One is, the 2 pillars, this pillar comes from Chris Freeman and Dick, is the analysis of knowledge and innovation and learning, which is a major discontinuity with an economic discipline that before Chris and before Dick treated knowledge as simply the structure of production function. Chris and Dick emphasized the fact that knowledge is a structure, that knowledge is different across sector and across technologies, and tried to understand the regularities and in the pattern of change and the regularities in learning processes. This is a first major pillar. The second one, more developed with Sid Winter, with the root in Herb Simon, is that what do actually individual and firm do? No, what is knowledge at the end? I mean, knowledge is not, you cannot, like our neoclassical friend try to do, I have a kilo of knowledge. No. Knowledge is a procedure. It's part of what people do, individually and collectively, what people know. So you have got to understand the regularities in routines, heuristics, organizational behaviors, institutional behavior. And this is the pillar that links knowledge with the behavior of organization. The third is placing this in industrial dynamics. It was mentioned already by Franco and by Mariana. You have processes of learning that are imperfectly selected by not only markets, but sometimes in the head of the agent themselves, by financial interaction, with interaction with the state. In any case, you have got a process of weeding out, imperfect weeding out. These 3 pillars put together make up modern evolutionary theory, in my view, in an extreme synthesis. Pioneered by, again, Chris, Dick, and Sid Winter. This has got enormous implications, as I already mentioned, for a theory of development, because it keeps away the emphasis from capital accumulation and puts it on capabilities accumulation. And indeed, organizational capabilities are even more complicated than technological capabilities. Then the big question is how you build them. In fact, catching up is a bit reductionist because it gives an idea of a sort of technological frontier up there, and you have got to achieve it. You want to have processes by which you increase, yes, income, but you increase the welfare of the people that is not monotonic in the average per capita income. Policy implication. Dick, it has been mentioned, the moon and the ghetto. Dick has been always active on not only policy prescription, but also active policy advice. at least insofar as he was allowed to. I remember, I was a kid, I remember the OECD discussion that involved Chris, Dick, Luc Soet and myself as the youngest guys there. And it was the first time that was suggested the notion that Mariana developed and refined enormously of mission-oriented policies. And the idea was that you had mission-oriented, that, as the word says, you establish goals that are quite independent from any silly cost-benefit analysis, but are defined by the political economy of a country, of social groups, and then you implement them on the ground of what you know about knowledge accumulation, etc., etc. The idea was the opposition was so-called mission-oriented, diffusion-oriented policies. Diffusion-oriented was essentially let the market work and help to smooth out the market. Of course, we won, we in the sense of Dick, Chris, etc. That was 1980, 81, 82. The representative of the US and England and the UK came in and said, diffusion-oriented is winning. And if you say that it's not winning, we stop giving you the money. Then diffusion-oriented won. And up till Mariana, nobody talked any longer about mission-oriented policies and industrial policies more generally. I'd like to conclude by mentioning fields that are still under-researched. One is indeed institution. We know a bit, we know a lot about institutions supporting innovation and knowledge. We don't know enough about other complementary institutions like the labor market, income distribution, financial policies. In general, the political economy in the macrosphere. As I have seriously criticizing Sid and Dick, I was always saying there is too much Schumpeter and too little Keynes in evolutionary theory in the American version. And I believe it. With all the corollaries of on income distribution, etc. Another thing, another aspect, last but not least, is an underlying techno-optimism that we all have shared. In fact, I mean, together with the enormous technical progress came the enormous amount of shit that we distribute in the environment. Not only CO2, but all the poisoning the earth, killing the biovariety. So the connotation that there is always creative destruction, but the emphasis on creative, we should maybe switch to the emphasis on the destruction. And the destruction that is not only in terms of social fabric, but it is also in the entire earth that we live in. This is something, this is urgent. I think that Dick, if were here, he would have agreed, Chris the same. it is time to put these pieces together, and it is very urgent. And since it is urgent and important, this should be taken out of the hands of the economist. I mean, like war. A war is something that is too serious to be left to economists. You say, I want to win the war. I don't do any cost-benefit analysis. Should I build this bomb or not? I build it if it helps me to win. This is the same in terms of climate and social justice. One has got to take it as a sort of, using Mariana language, sort of meta-messages that go well beyond the silly calculation of the economist. And on that, I end. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanni, for that intervention. That was great. We will move on to Professor Carlota Perez.
Well, thanks for this opportunity to honor Dick Nelson. I'm sorry, as everybody else that's been online, that I could not be with you in person. I really think our community still has a lot to learn from the giants that were Dick Nelson and Chris Freeman. 20 years ago, in 2005, Dick Nelson set himself to answer a question that was becoming increasingly important. What type of economic system is capitalism? Although evolutionary economics did understand the crucial role played by the state, standard economic theory no longer did. By 2005, everybody had been obliged to embrace the free market as the essence of the system. And we were all supposed to see the state as a necessary burden. In fact, government was the problem, as Rasigan had declared. So, in the prevailing free market atmosphere, Dick had to build the argument very carefully. Even asking the question about the nature of capitalism was a heresy. And Dick's answer was, capitalism is a mixed economic system that functions thanks to the constant interaction between the market and the state. The state is not an add-on to the all-powerful market, in charge of simply maintaining the context, fixing its failures, and keeping order. The state is an indispensable part of the economic system. Great, but that's no news for us. Everybody in this meeting agrees with that. So why should I bring it up now? For a very good reason. I believe that most of our community continues to work mainly with business innovation and how to promote it in the good direction. Yes, of course, technical change is still essential. But in these politically turbulent times, governments need to reinvent themselves. So we need to focus on institutional innovation, as well as on policy, organizational, and service innovation, and on how they happen. From the beginning, evolutionary economics was interdisciplinary. Dick Nelson defined it in 4 points, and the fourth one was highlighting the role of non-market institutions. So economics was interdisciplinary, and he defined it in 4 points. And the fourth one was highlighting the role of non-market institutions. Now, no economist was going to say that. It's precisely evolutionary economics that did. And when Chris Freeman created SPRU, he called it Science Policy Research Unit. And when he created the journal, he called it Research Policy. And now every research paper or PhD ends with policy recommendations. Do we really know how they can be adopted and applied? Do we really understand the distance between our recommendations and the actual fact of putting them in practice? In fact, the sorts of research we do, how many of you are aware of the SAFO project promoted by Chris Freeman in SPRU in the 1970s? 72 similar pairs of successful and unsuccessful technological innovations that were studied in the field for many months to identify the factors that might have determined the difference in result. Could we do something similar for public policy innovations? How many PhDs today are developing theory about how innovation happens in government, as Giovanni Dosi did when identifying technological paradigms in competitive companies? Of course, we have always been moving in that direction. When Bengt-Ake and Chris developed the concept of national systems of innovation, many others followed with further research and fieldwork. More recently, Mariana Mazzucato introduced a policy model of public-private missions. I now find out that this missions was already a concept before. I don't think any of us knew it. But basically, the thing is that Mariana based it on studying the moon landing project in detail. She was really trying to find how it can happen. How do we connect public and private in the major innovation process of transforming the world? And now the concept of transformative innovation introduced by Schott and Weissmuller was reanalyzed by Bengt-Ake and reconceptualized in a forthcoming book by Radosevich, Sute, and Serger, focusing on regions and regional policies. Super important now that satellites and all these things allow regions to be much more autonomous and require much more innovation capability, because it's now possible to have industrial policy at every level, from the smallest to the supranational. So we are moving in the right direction. But there's a whole world out there in political science and public administration looking at innovation in the public sector without the evolutionary economic lens. They are looking at it just from the government world. They are not connecting the two things, the relationship between actual innovation in the economy and innovation in the state. In fact, has anybody studied the experience of MindLab in Denmark, or that of its followers in Mexico City, Washington, D.C., or Singapore? There was something there that was really interesting about promoting innovation in the public sector, but we didn't have any role in it, but we could still learn a lot. Have we engaged with the ideas put forward by Moore, Bason, or Osborne, the political scientists and public administrators, on how innovation happens in the public sector and what its peculiarities are? Have we actually debated that, looked at it, used it? They've done a lot of work. We might be wasting a major opportunity to contribute and develop a theory of institutional innovation in contrast with private sector innovation. Do we need to join forces with them? With the political scientists and public administrators? In its glory days, SPRU had many engineers and scientists in its staff and in its networks. Do we need to stop looking at numbers and start doing more empirical analysis and more talking to people? By the way, the empirical analysis was precisely what both Dick Nelson and Chris Freeman recommended all the time. Do we know why the majorities are not supporting the green transition? Can we tell why the same environmental policies have succeeded in some countries and not in others? The same ones. I could go on and on about the unanswered questions. Together with the green transition, re-globalization is bound to require major policy innovation, and re-globalization has got to happen now. We must make sure we are ready to help make the most of it. If capitalism is a mixed economic system, as Dick Nelson held, then innovation happens both in the private and in the public sector, and also in their interactions. We should listen to some of Dick Nelson's last written words. He said, the evolution of institutions is the least developed part of an emerging evolutionary economics. We cannot replace standard economics if we don't do both. I would say that those words about developing emerging evolutionary economics contain an implicit task, and I believe we should take it as Dick Nelson's testament. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlota, for giving very concrete ways of following some of the doors that the work of Dick Nelson opened, and putting that as a challenge to the academic community here. I would like to now open it up a little bit. I know there's a lot of people here that, can I say, just by you have to be honest now, raise of hands. How many of you have cited Dick Nelson's work in your papers? All right. So I'm expecting comments from all of you with the citations, yes. No, but I know that this is work that that lives in all of our literature that we are developing as a community, and I know that many of you have worked with Dick Nelson in your careers. So I would like to solicit maybe comments from some of you in the audience. I know that Mamo would like to say a few words.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you for all the wonderful remarks you made about him. I sincerely, truly miss him. I wish he's still with us. Yeah, but I just wanted to let you know that he personally, he was so nice to me. And Franco Malerba and him, when I went to Columbia University, I was a student at Columbia University, and Dick Nelson was teaching at Columbia University, and I was invited a number of times by Columbia University. When I go there, since his house is in New York, he invited me, and then Franco Malerba informed him, Mamo is coming, please look after him. And just like Bengt-Ake and his wife used to look after me in Aalborg, he started looking after me, cooking food for me. And you will not believe it, the kind of thing he did. Not once, 3-4 times when I went to New York, he was looking after me at Columbia. I don't want to say a lot. I think I need to write something. When I write about it, you'll do. The other important thing he did was also when Globelics was formed. You remember, Bengt-Ake knows it. We started it with Africa, with a conference in 2001. When we started there, Bengt-Ake wanted to develop Globelics from it, but I was interested in Africa Leaks. So when I said because we put a book called Putting Africa First, The Making of African Innovation System, then I was a bit, I don't know, I was a bit confused. Then I said, Dick Nelson came to me, he advised me, Mamo, don't worry about it. Let Globelics come. Africa Leaks will also come. So nothing to worry. And he said, he advised me because I was a bit confused at that time. So things like that. He was a wonderful man. And I just want to say a few words. And thank you, my Erika, my queen of Ethiopia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. KJ, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you very much. I must say it is, thank you for the opportunity. I think it was sometime in 1995, I wrote a letter, those days, letter to Dick Nelson, who was a professor in Columbia, when I got the Ford Foundation for postdoctoral research. I got a letter, which is still I'm keeping, where he said, look, I would love to welcome you, but Columbia is not really tuned to welcome and provide the appropriate space for the young scholars. I would introduce you to Bobby Wenson, in Yale. So on his recommendation, I went to Yale University. And later, when I was inducted to the Globelics board by Bengt-Ake Lundvall after 2007 Globelics conference in Kerala that I organized, it moved to the idea of, after a few months, moved to the idea of starting the journal, Innovation and Development. I got wonderful advices. Of course, the name was given by Innovation Development. I would like to publicly declare that the name was not mine, it's by Bengt-Ake Lundvall. But Dick Nelson told me, these are the two inspiring people. He told me that you should ensure that the journal is least priced and reaches to as many people as possible. But somehow we have not been able to accomplish that. And later, I remember I had an opportunity to, almost all the meetings we used to meet him, I had an opportunity to travel with him to Argentina from Washington on the way to Argentina conference, Buenos Aires. I remember we were discussing about this idea of institutions. He told me about institution. Later I read the article, the hard institutions and soft institutions, cake and the recipe for making a cake, the manner in which we explain things, and I think I always cherish the discussion. And at the instance of Franco, I later got an opportunity to go to his home and be with him in Colombia and as part of the Catch-Up project. And finally, I was very happy that hardly 6 months before his leaving this world, we could organize, Franco and me, we could organize a kind of a meeting, online meeting to kind of to remember his contributions, honor him. So though he's not here physically, I can indeed feel his presence very much here with all the eloquently articulated contributions of Dick Nelson to the community and understanding the subject that we are all concerned. Thank you very much.
Are there any other comments? There's one there at the back. Please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim. I'm an honors student at the University of Johannesburg. I have a question and a response to Prof. Perez. The question is, you mentioned something very critical, that government should be a part of the economic system always. But in a country such as South Africa, where government trust is at 36%, and the private sector has over 60% trust, that is very impossible to achieve for government to be incorporated into the economic system. They can reinvent themselves, of course, but people won't trust. And what government needs to achieve, I believe, is trust before we can think about them reinventing themselves. I have a response to one of the questions that you posed, that why isn't there much adoption to the green economy? The truth is, in the global south, people have different priorities, and one of them is simply surviving, right? The unemployment rate, youth unemployment rate in South Africa stands at over 46%. We can't honestly be focusing on being a bit more greener while the young people don't have jobs. So priorities are different from the global south to the global north and the west. So we are still focusing on just surviving, making it through the year, through each and every day. That's my response to your question.
The first question about whether government can do something when the private sector is so powerful. I can tell you something very simple. I have been studying the 5 revolutions and what has happened with each of them since the Industrial Revolution in England. I couldn't find a single case of a country that was able to make a leap into development and a leap into including forging ahead as the US and Germany did between 1770 and the First World War, without a very, very strong role for the state. I mean, major role, very often with protectionism, very often with not only just protectionism and subsidies and little simple things, no, much more complicated things, much more complex things, much more participation. And we have seen China as an example now, right in front of our eyes, if we want to see that the state has been crucial in everything that has happened there. So first of all, forget about it. The private sector can be tamed and can be guided and can be, if you have a competent state, if you have a state that has funds, how they get it, that's another problem, which is solved precisely in the cases where you succeed. If you don't succeed, if you don't have funds, you can't succeed. But you also have to find a way of, and sometimes even corruption has been there in cases. I mean, corruption was there in Singapore, corruption was there in Korea, corruption was there. And it is today in China. So it's not even that sort of problem. So I would say we just need to find out how. And in each case, with all the difficulties, of course, we need leaders that are capable of doing it, and we need to understand and to be able to provide information about how it has happened before. And your second question?
Oh, the second was actually a response to one of your questions, that how as the global south hasn't moved to green economy.
Okay,
yes.
Well, I'm talking in general about the north and the south, and obviously the thing is that I think that there are cases within the global south where there has been more success with the same sorts of policies. What I'm talking about is comparing, using it as a research question. If you see that the same policy has been applied by two different governments, and one has succeeded and the other hasn't, then that provides information for how you can do more effective government. I mean, that was just one little example because it's so big now, the whole question of the green transition. And obviously there is something I want to add. There is a lot of people talking about the green transition as if it were a technological revolution. Unfortunately, it is not. It is only a direction in which we can take the ICT revolution, which is the real revolution, which increases productivity, increases profitability, and has an enormous new power that has to be guided. And the thing is that it has to be guided towards the green transition, among other things, towards social justice, etc. But that can only be done by the state. So the state has to tilt the playing field and change it so that business can only be profitable and can be more profitable if it does the right thing for the planet and for society than if it does the wrong thing, which is what it's been doing. So it's always a question of understanding how innovation happens in government.
Great, thank you. I see Mariana's hand is up too.
Yeah, I mean, I kept my comments very brief because you had said 3 minutes, so I took that seriously. But I mean, what I would have said had I spoken a bit more is exactly the answer to the question, which I think is excellent, that was just raised, which is, it's not by coincidence that we end up with this lack of capacity, right? If the underlying theory of value is that the private sector creates value and the public sector is there to facilitate, to enable, to fix market failures, and all these really boring words, even after the financial crisis, when without the public sector, the whole system would have fallen apart, we still use boring words like lender of last resort, instead of investor of first resort. So this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that if at best we're fixing system failures, market failures, it's not actually surprising that even the curriculum for civil servants is part of the problem. Just think of the difference between an MPA and an MBA. The MBA is like decision sciences, strategic management, organizational behavior, rejuvenating the mature corporation, because if corporations become big, vertical and bureaucratic, we don't just roll our eyes and say bureaucracy, we try to change it. whereas with the public sector, we roll our eyes, then that requires so much attention on what kind of training do we need, what kind of capacity and dynamic capabilities within the public institutions. Our own institute, all we do is exactly what Carlota was saying, actually studying case studies of the Vanovas, of the Citras, of the Corfos, of the Mind Labs that you mentioned. But that's not to glorify the state. It's actually to learn what works on the ground. And in South Africa, but also like in Italy, sometimes these public organizations have actually been part of the problem. In Italy, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti is a public bank. It doesn't work like BNDES in Brazil. We just give out money to whatever, company or industry needs help. So if you do have the missions, what does that mean for how a public bank itself works? What does it mean for its portfolio? What does it mean for the conditions set on the private sector instead of just giving out money, guarantees, or tax incentives? And, that idea of actually putting a lot of attention on procurement policy, for example, which is often 30% of a government's budget, wasted, or the design of a public bank instead of actually glorifying the public bank, comparing different public banks, digital public infrastructure. This is the kind of massive array of case studies that we need, but also to bring it back to the theory. It can't just be case studies, right? This is what what Dick Nelson was so good at, that appreciative theorizing, the link between theory and practice, which in our institute we call practice-based learning. But I just wanted to say also one thing, which I think Carlota alluded to, which is personally, I think some of these innovation studies have been part of the problem. They've become very apolitical. A lot of the entrepreneurship studies and the innovation studies themselves kind of don't even really look at the political economy. They don't question how much lobbying has actually happened in the name of innovation. I could go through Piketty's curve of inequality and tell you every 5 or 10 years, the narrative on innovation, whether it's from the venture capital community or the pharmaceutical industry, that actually helped inequality rise even higher, whether it was the effect on capital gains taxes or different types of R&D tax cuts or intellectual property rights, how they're actually governed. So I think we should, as a call to action, also in Richard's memory, because as Carlota said, he brought political economy to the center. It wasn't just innovation studies. Make sure that we ourselves as a community are not part of the problem by depoliticizing how innovation itself gets used to lobby for some very, very regressive policies. These are two separate points, but I just wanted to say it because I think my experience is we're also part of the problem.
That's great. Thanks, Mariana. Great comments. Giovanni, your hand is up.
Well, I'd like to follow up on Mariana. I mean, one of the, and this is also a sort of criticism to Dick. If one wants to follow what Mariana and Carlota were saying, one has got to ask, what is the nature of the state? Dick was, in my view, a bit too liberal in his foundations, with neglecting profoundly the idea that there are conflicting interests in society, and we cannot always proceed cheek to cheek. And maybe the mixed economy that we observed in the last, in the 3 glorious decades now, or most mythological, after World War II, were a sort of exception in the history of Western capitalism. One has got to rediscover the link between the structure of the state that Mariana is talking about and what the state represents. Because if the state represents simply the corporation, that is the managing board of capitalism, this is a citation from Lenin, then obviously the best role of the state is to have the consultancy companies that Mariana is talking about. They are the direct expression of the Morgan Stanley of this world, the McKinsey of this world, are the direct link between capitalist and the little power that is left to the state. So one should reflect also on what does the state express, and how do we organize alternative interest to influence what the state does and the composition of the state. The other thing is, again, following up Mariana, is a lot of current innovation studies are part of the problem, not a part of the solution. And more generally, I mean, I think that the mainstream tends to absorb, recycle, make it and tame some of the issues and contribution of the evolutionary community. I think that this year Nobel Prizes are a good reflection of that. I mean, is a lyophilized recycling of things that Dick, Chris said that the entire community had been saying over the last 40 years. In fact, I mean, one of the essays that I will ask my PhD student to write is tell us, to explain what you find in the 3 Nobel Prizes that were not already there in the writing of the Chris, Dicks, etc. of this world. Of course, they get the maximum grade because there's nothing. In fact, there is a reduction. And the same with innovation. Innovation is increasingly going to count patterns and go and see the effects, the marginal effect on patterns on proxy of performances. Sorry, this was not what Dick, Chris, and the others had in mind. We should pay attention to that. I mean, the attempt to eat out some of our themes in the mainstream is dangerous. It's like the Counter-Reformation in the Catholic Church. I mean, you had the Reformation, and then the Counter-Reformation picks up bits and pieces and gives continuity to the Church. In any case, I mean, beware when you hear the word neoclassical, neo-institutionalist, neo-Schumpeterian, neoplastic. If there is something neo, is associated with something potentially bad, I think.
Carlota, I see your hand is up, but Bengt-Ake had his hand up here in person before. So if you don't mind, I'll give Bengt-Ake the mic, and then we'll hand over to you.
Just don't know how to put up the yellow hand. Sorry.
First, it's a pity you're not here. Huh? Can you hear me? Giovanni?
Yes.
Because all the sessions I've been to so far at this conference have been excellent, and all of them tends to agree that we need a stronger focus on political economy. I think this is general. So I think there's a great absorptive capacity here at the conference to what you guys are saying with different nuances. Just another remark, and this is about Nelson Libra. I think it's not wrong, but interestingly, he has indirectly has a major influence on global geopolitics. He had a student in a Chinese student, Lundvall, who he kept in contact with all his life. And Lundvall did a series of case studies of Chinese industry, where he showed that with a kind of nitty-gritty case study type that you have talked about, where he showed that the basic problem was while they invest a lot in R&D, there was almost no result in terms of high technology or exports or any other kind of indicator. This was the beginning in China around 2006 of what became independent innovation. And it took China, that was the beginning of transforming China in that direction. And it's interesting that it was a student of Dick Nelson who was the main inspirator using the kind of methods you have just described. Thank you.
Thank you, Bengt-Ake. I think I'm handing over now to Carlota.
Well, I'm going to disagree with Giovanni. I don't think that the golden age of the post-war is an exception. It's actually a typical process that happens every time capitalism is in danger. The Victorian boom, the Belle Epoque, and the post-war golden age are similar processes that were brought about because, yes, the committee solving, taking care of the interest of the bourgeoisie, which is the state, discovered that the best way to save the bourgeoisie was to actually help the majorities, was to actually set up a win-win game between business and society. And that's how you get the golden ages. And there have only been 3, unfortunately, because capitalism, the progress that we've seen from the satanic mills in the early 19th century, all the way to the sort of good life that the blue-collar workers had in the 1950s and sort of 60s, is actually the way that progress occurs in capitalism. Ratcheting back with creative destruction, destroying with every technological revolution, you destroy jobs, you destroy industries, you destroy regions, all those horrible things happen, and then people get angry, and then you get populism. And you had populism in the 1840s, you had populism in the 1890s, you had populism in the 1930s. And we have populism now, and we have plenty of populism because the problem has been the creative destruction this time has been worse than ever. So if we don't understand that there is this progress because for the capitalists it's good to solve their problems, then we will never, then we can do nothing. We are dead because the interests of the bourgeoisie are never going to coincide with the interest of the people unless they're in danger. And they are in danger when people get so angry and when problems are so serious that you've got to find the solution. And that's how the social democratic parties and the progressive era in the US and all the beginning of the welfare state in all of Europe was in the 1900s, at the beginning, in the golden age, in the Belle Epoque, and so on. That's what I'm writing a book about. So I am very informed about all those things. So yes, the interest of the bourgeoisie are central, but the bourgeoisie are sometimes in trouble, and they need, like right now, it's a mess. To live in Trump's world, it's got to be fixed at some point. And I think there's going to be a gigantic crash, not a little crash of AI and all that. That's going to be the trigger that's going to pull the whole economy down. And once that whole thing happens, we're going to have to fix it, and we better be there with some ideas about how to do it. I think Mariana has a lot of ideas about how to do it, thank God. Okay.
Thank you. I will not jump in because otherwise it will be a conversation between
you. No, of course. But I have to answer because you are actually sort of making it impossible You know, the way you were saying it, it seemed like you could do nothing. And lots of people think that because, of course, we are now in the worst situation ever. And the young have never known better times. The young have only seen horror, have only seen injustice, have only seen inequality. And we've got to tell them there were times in the past when there was a better time for the majorities, and we've got to construct one now, and we have to think, we have to know how to do it now. So in a way, that's what I'm
and to not listen to the no growth folks, because they have
not follow the degrowth people.
Great. I think we have Franco, I see your hand is up, but we are going to Rasigan, who is next to me, and somebody here in the room have raised their hands before. So if it's okay, I'm going to hand over to Rasigan and then to another speaker, Samir, and then I'll come back to you.
So thanks very much. And it's really good to be part of a lively conversation that's taking place. Yeah? And as it's emerging, I think it gives due respect to Professor Nelson as well. But at the same time, colleagues, I hope you don't mind a pessimistic note about us not over-trivializing issues as well. And within this context, yeah, you have all been welcome to South Africa, Southern Africa. Yeah. Nearly 4/5 of all the gold, before you call it as an era, was dug from under our feet. What is our situation today? And reconcile this with the type of lessons that we are being told about. I would also encourage the student at the back, be a little careful with respect to opinion surveys, which speak about a performance in a governance structure that's preset, as opposed to an open-ended question that asks, does that articulate the democracy that we want in our country itself? Corporate state capture is exactly what it is. Yeah. So I'd be worried about findings that give a plus to one and a minus to the other, when it's that very parasitic relationship that's driven corruption in this country as an example. Let's be very clear about what government is, who gets into it. Let's also define specific roles for the state, which is bigger than the government itself. Yeah? And within that, try and find what is it that will help us with our levels of precarity, etc., to move beyond it. It cannot be that we continue this north-south division. If you don't mind also, just reminding people, I hope you don't mind, where's Rainer? It's not being me being nasty about the Germans, but we remember something about Willy Brandt. And what was the object of the north-south line? This was a GDP per capita measurement and a segregation into who was earning what in where they were. In terms of where we are heading forward to, and what we are arguing is not a return to similar divisions. Yeah? What we've seen emerged is this notion of multipolarities, of us moving the centricism. This isn't hierarchies that we're climbing anymore. It's also a quest for our survival. And we've seen the naked violence being visited upon us in world systems itself. Colleagues, we cannot close our eyes to the genocides taking place, whether it's Sudan, the DRC, or West Asia and Palestine in particular. We have to acknowledge this is part and parcel of the very systems we are talking about. So where do we place our trust in that level? Yeah? This is a call for all of us to be enjoined inside, co-constructing and challenging policy. Let's be much more critical about what's being presented to us, while at the same time acknowledging the reality of our past. What has brought us here today? Have we decolonized our thinking, let alone trying to have instruments that perform differently? This is crucial for us to grasp what is here for a world majority and our survival into the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Erika. So my name is Samir. I'm with the Department of Anthropology at the University of the Western Cape. I also headed an organization called 50 Years is Enough, the U.S. Network for Global Economic Justice, where it was my job to basically argue with the IMF for like 20 years. It was a long time. Anyhow, in so far as I'm understanding the discussion, and I can echo Rasigan's sentiment, it's good to be part of this discussion. insofar as I can understand the discussion and sort of to chime in on the question that Giovanni's asking, which is what is the role of the state here? I think the answer to that depends on the extent to which our states are actually democratic, right? And I can just give a quick story from my own experience working in a village in Vietnam that was suffering from serious corruption problems and so on. When we were able to lobby the Communist Party of Vietnam to release the budgets, and then we were able to do even a little bit of training around like what's going on here on the ground level. The corruption in the system became very, very apparent, which was great for the villagers. But the second thing that happened was the villagers looked at the budget and they said, I should just say this is one of the poorest villages in Vietnam that I was working in. They said, look, actually in the harvest season, we're actually supposed to pay taxes. We're actually supposed to give some rice back to the government, right? And for the first time, the government was actually getting money from, as I say, one of the poorest villages in Vietnam. And it was the relationship with the state fundamentally changed. And by the way, the state looked so favorably on that, we had to beg them for, I can't remember the exact length of time, but I think it was 18 months we begged them to release the budget, just in terms of transparency. And then within another 18 months, it suddenly became the universal law all over Vietnam. And it was taken up like that. Now, so that's a story about the power of transparency. But here in South Africa, I'm worried, and just at the current moment, I'm worried about, like, does the transparency mean anything? Because we have stories, and South Africans in the room will forgive me for bringing this up, but we have a president who is known to have had, whether he did it himself or was in knowledge of it, we don't know, but he had US dollars sewn into a freaking couch, yeah? For whatever reason, right? And so in that, and everyone knows about it, and what happened, guys? Is he still our president? Yeah? So was there any accountability at all? So my question is just in this era, when there's so much stuff, Rasigan's mentioned the genocide and so on, the various genocides, which are live streamed. No one can deny that they don't know about it. In this era, when transparency is not an issue, like, what is the solution? It's a question I don't have an answer to. I'm genuinely raising it for all of us to consider in the sessions going forward.
Thanks for the comments. I think it's a reflection of the what happens when we start applying these ideas into specific contexts, into specific circumstances, and try to answer real world questions with these theories and concepts. So I would like to hand over to Franco. You had your hand up. Franco, please go ahead.
Well, I really enjoyed the discussion between Carlota, Giovanni, and Mariana on policy, institutions, and so on. Wonderful. And I think you got the right point about what Dick emphasized and what is missing in Dick. Although I think that in the Moon and the Ghetto, there is already tension between the part of the society that is driven by certain things and the rest that is lay behind. But we are towards the end of the meeting, and this is also about the legacy of Dick Nelson. And so in a sense, I want to move back a little bit to the legacy for the young students. I see a lot of students, PhD students and so on, and move away to the policy discussion, which is very important and so on. And I think one thing that we did not have time to discuss is the fact that Dick always focused not just on generalization, but on the context in which actors act, in which technologies evolve and so on, in a sense that the context and the specificity of the technology in the history. You don't remember, but Dick, the first paper of Dick was the invention of the transistor, with a wonderful case study of how the transistor was invented, companies, individuals, institutions. Then he did a lot of studies on pharmaceuticals and so on. He did the National Innovation System, in which he discussed policies. And so in a sense, he put a lot of emphasis on the specificities, on the way analysis is done. And among his major partners, Chris Freeman was one of them, but I want to mention Nate Rosenberg, who has been, in a sense, forgotten. Nate was really talking about technologies, and Bengt-Ake that discussed about national innovation systems. So his point was, have a look at the context, but in a dynamic way, which is, an historical way, which brings in, I think, the point I want to make. A lot of people talk about coevolutionary processes. We all agree that evolution is driven by coevolutionary processes between technology, industry, markets, and institutions. But few people really do an in-depth analysis of the links between the various actors over time, and not only in an empirical way, but also in an appreciative way. And this is something that I would urge students to do, particularly when they look at emerging countries, developing countries, because coevolution means lock-ins, path dependency, interdependencies, and whatnot. And it's important not to just say everything coevolves with everybody, everything else, which is something we all agree. But you need to go down, as Dick would have done, and Dick would have urged, get things right, go into the nitty-gritty of the specific linkages between institutions, as Carlota was saying, public policy, as Carlota was saying, and Mariana and so on, and the industry, the markets, and the broader institutions. And if you do it in an historical way, as Chris would have urged, as Nate Rosenberg would have urged, go in depth, dirt your hands, and develop this dynamic, historical, process-driven analysis. I think a lot of progress will be done in Globelics and in broader evolutionary arena. And I think this could be one legacy of Dick that represents also a big challenge in addition to policy, institutions, as you rightly mentioned. As Dick would have mentioned, do coevolutionary analysis in a deep, articulated, and process way. This is my only point. Thank you.
I want to think. Oh, Carlota, you want to make a last point?
Is there still time?
We have 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay,
1 minute.
I just wanted to send a message of hope to all the people in the global south that are feeling that there is nothing, no solution, there's nothing. Every technological revolution, those golden ages I've talked about, are based on the fact that the policies that are applied actually create dynamic demand for business in the areas where business needs that demand so that growth can happen. So, for instance, obviously in mass production, one can see the welfare state as a way of guaranteeing that the workers would be consumers, that they would actually buy all the cars, refrigerators, houses, all these things. So in a way, it's because mass production was the way it was that mass consumption became the solution for the Committee of the Affairs of the Bourgeoisie, because the bourgeoisie needed demand for consumer goods. And of course, the Cold War guaranteed demands for military goods, which were also for mass production, except for a few that were for high-tech things, which is what Mariana studied. How do you do something which is outside the range of what the norm was, which was this thing? Now we are in a different situation. The demand is not for consumer goods. The important demand for business is for capital goods, for technology, for high-tech services, for all those things, infrastructure, big things. Those are like in the first globalization. That's exactly what happened in the Belle Epoque. It was guaranteed that you had world markets. That's what the British Empire did. So now the bourgeoisie needs, capital needs demand for capital goods. And how do you get demand for capital goods? Through investment. And how do you do more investment? You do it in the South, which is the only place where there isn't enough investment of the sort that's needed for this. So in a way, what could come now, especially if we have a big crash, but if we have some brilliant people who understand, because right now the geopolitical tensions between China and the West are actually a zero-sum game. They're fighting for the same markets, and they're not enough. So they are desperate. They need demand. So there is, the Chinese need home demand and more, and they're doing it. The Belt and Road Initiative, the West isn't doing it yet. The Chinese have understood. So if we understand that that is what they need, maybe when we think of policy, we will take that into account and design policy in such a way that we save the South, we develop the South, but we also do it in a win-win situation with the North. I actually think that capitalism is a horrible system, but if we can shape it, take advantage of its tensions, take advantage of its needs, if we really understand it deeply, we can build better times for our societies.
Thanks, Carlota. I see Giovanni and Mariana. I left
more
the
debate.
applause.
Well,
It's been a spontaneous applause here. Giovanni and Mariana, we would like to start wrapping up. So if you don't mind making a very, very short last remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, I will not, making a very short wrap up, I will not answer Carlota. I will simply answer with one question. I mean, tell me another period outside the 3 decades that had so few workers shot by the police. The Belle Epoque, etc., has always been marked. Think of Taylorism that is associated with the Belle Epoque period. Taylorism was implemented with the guns. The number of workers shot in the US by private police, together with public police, is of the order of the dozen and dozen. So the state has changed. But I did not want to make this comment.
No.
And the comment further on this. I wanted to flag a big question. Where are we going to train the new generation in this evolutionary paradigm written large? We have a problem. We have a problem because the only two institutions that are there, to my knowledge, are Pisa and London Mariana Place. We don't have SPRU any longer. We don't have Yale. We don't have Stanford. We don't have Berkeley. We don't have Aalborg. We have a problem there. Because the continuity of the research program is made by also community that live together and grow and discuss with the young people. We should have a collective reflection on that. Because otherwise the legacy of the big mentors get diluted into the various neos.
Thanks, Giovanni. Mariana, and then Bengt-Ake.
Yeah, just super quickly, because I think the point is to give hope also through concrete stuff that we can do together. And at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at UCL that Giovanni just mentioned, one of the things we're doing is building, with the help of Bloomberg Philanthropies, a public sector capability index. So instead of the indices that have been about, the ease of doing business index, which is basically how much you exploit your workers, the easier it is to do business. We are interviewing civil servants across 50 different cities, most of which, by the way, are in the Global South. In South Africa, we've had both the Johannesburg and Cape Town city government working with us. And it's not to glorify what's happening, it's actually to identify either the lack of or the existence of dynamic capabilities, which we actually differentiate from just organizational routines and structural capacity. And so anyway, just to say, there's about 50 cities we're working with. And separately, one of the things we actually launched there at Globelics, or not so much launched, but represented, is a network of women economists, mainly not only in the Global South. that we're bringing together to also mentor PhD students, but especially to be a thorn in the side of many governments, thinking also of what was just said about South Africa, where we hear, slogans like in Mexico City, prosperidad compartida, polos del bienestar, how to make sure that the academic debate, the economist debate, and especially focused on women economist debate, can make sure that what we're bringing to the table is not actually just serving, as was said, a kind of parasitic public-private ecosystem, but really producing that additionality, making things happen that otherwise would not have happened, just like we tell governments, but from the link between kind of, the economics debate and what's actually happening on the ground. Because coming back to my previous point, if we are not part of the solution of making sure that we don't get this old wine in new bottles, including the concept of missions that can get captured, then we're part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Last point from.
Just a reflection on where you can learn about these things. I went to a very interesting conference in Paris. They have a journal called Innovation, and as far as I understand, they combine evolutionary perspectives with political economy. I'm sure also that in Latin America we would find interesting places, like in Rio. I think we would find it also in China and many other places. So I think we shouldn't be so totally pessimistic. I actually think that the openness to new perspectives is much bigger in the global south than the impregnated neoclassical unsound climate in the global north. So let's hope that this works on. I think some of this discussion, I'm a simple mind, I'm not very complex in my thinking. I think you are speaking about two things. You are talking about the state as an actor who can solve problems. And you are talking about the state as something which is owned by specific classes. So you have a theory for policy, and you have a theory about the state. And I think we need both. I don't think the truth is that you cannot do anything reasonable in terms of policy. But I also think we should be completely clear that the limits are very narrow. And what changes these limits is not getting more clever people into the administration. It's when people begin to move around and make trouble. So I think, but it's a very simple way of putting things. I'm sure the reality is much more complex. Thank you. Thank you.
I think this is there's a saying, right, that you should live when you're ahead. Right? Sadly, this has been a fantastic discussion. I hope everybody here appreciates how rare and how special this occasion is. Having these contributions here, there's the stature of these academics and thinkers that have continued to shape our literature. It's a very special moment. It's a very special moment, and I feel very honored to have been able to facilitate this and to be sitting here. So thank you so much. I also think it's a great way of remembering and commemorating the work from Dick Nelson. I encourage all the young scholars, emerging scholars, to read the original text. Go and read The Moon and the Ghetto. Go and read all the papers that have been mentioned here, the latest contributions, those papers from 2020, 2022 that were mentioned by Franco as well, to really see what doors he left open for this community to take forward, such as the work on institutional innovation. And I think, in a time where academia has become a race to publish and to produce, and where we are sort of forgetting the importance of not only the product, the extent and the depth of the product, with the knowledge that he produced is immense, and it's extremely important, and we're discussing that. But it's also the process, the way in which that knowledge is produced, is something that people would remember you for as well. And it's very clear from the contributions and the tributes from people that Dick was not only an amazing scholar and left us with this amazing legacy to take forward, but he was also he will also be remembered for being an academic that was engaged, that had the time to dedicate to listen to people, that had the time to dedicate to think deeply about these issues and to learn from others. And that he was a gentleman, and I think that is something also worth remembering him for. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much to Mariana, to Carlota, to Giovanni, Franco. You managed to connect online and keep us completely engaged, so that was amazing. Thank you so much for joining and for making the time. Thank you, Rasigan. Thank you, Bengt-Ake. And thanks to the audience. Continue citing Nelson in your papers. And let's carry this work forward and continue evolving evolutionary economics. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika, and to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erika. And thank you all. Great to see you all.
We miss you here. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.